So President Trump was elected on a promise of mass deportations. On day one, he declared an emergency at the southern border. How have things changed for your organization and the clients you serve in his first 100 days?
Yeah, it definitely has been a very interesting first 100 days of the second Trump administration. In terms of our organization, at least for me, I sort of think about it in terms of what we knew would most likely happen because we saw it in the first Trump administration, and what we've been maybe surprised by. I'm in terms of what we sort of could predict would happen. We knew that enforcement priorities were going to ramp up. We knew that border security and all of that sort of thing was going to also amp up. We knew that certain programs like TPS, parole, even the asylum process were going to be negatively impacted. And we knew that there was going to be a sort of a resevering between relationships between immigration attorneys and DHS officials, a lot of things like that. What we weren't really expecting is, a lot of what we read in headlines today, right? At least a lot of us have been very surprised, for example, by the registration requirement that has not been used since 9/11 and hadn't been used before then since World War II.
Can you break that down for
Yeah.
viewers who might not be familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's essentially a policy that hasn't been used, like I said, since 9/11 that requires every person who entered without documentation to fill out a pretty extensive registration form online. There are some exceptions for people who don't necessarily have to register because they have already been processed and fingerprinted through other means, but you have to provide your address history, work history, contact information, and to some extent some family information as well. And so the reviving of that policy certainly has been a bit of a surprise for us, and yeah, we're still learning how to navigate that as well. I think there have been a lot of unpredictable things that have happened in the Trump administration so far, but I think we are deeply alarmed by everything that has been happening with the deportations into El Salvador and just this seeming, just absence of due process for a lot of folks.
And I want to get into everything that we're talking about and watching. But first, I want to hear more about the lived experiences of folks you're serving, people who are here in New Mexico without legal status. What has it been like for them?
Yeah, I mean, we are all sort of learning these new changes, reading these executive orders kind of at the same time, right? And so our community members, our clients are definitely amplifying the fear and uncertainty that we as advocates are feeling. We have had a very significant uptick in calls into our intake line asking about clarification, explanation about sudden changes on any given day, asking if these new changes will affect our clients' cases, people, especially and actually even including lawful permanent residents, citizens, asking if it's safe for them to travel, asking if it's safe for them to now apply for, a family member's immigration application. So the fear and uncertainty is very, very palpable.
Well, and likely adding to the confusion, potentially the fear, is how kind of opaque the deportation process is. I mean, we've heard stories of people being detained here in New Mexico, sent to other states, sent to other countries, and potentially not even their home country. Can you explain how deportation works a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly more complicated than the way that the Trump administration has sort of been portraying it. There are some people who are sort of, I guess, eligible, for lack of better word, to be removed expeditiously, either because of their immigration history or because of their criminal history, where certainly they do not have the right to present their case in front of an immigration judge, for example.
Okay.
The vast majority of people, however, do have that due process protection, where if they are, for example, in the United States without documentation, have interactions with ICE, what typically happens, whether they're detained or not, is that then they are processed through the immigration court system, where the immigration judge determines whether or not they are deportable or removable. What we are seeing, unfortunately, is that in a lot of circumstances, that entire process is being bypassed altogether, with people either being removed randomly without their families being notified, like the group of people were here in New Mexico, or or being taken to either other states or deported to third country prisons.
You talk about the people that were here in New Mexico. 48 New Mexico residents were, by some accounts, disappeared, unaccounted for, after being detained from an ICE raid. Do we have an update on what happened to them?
Yeah, our understanding, and the New Yorker published an article a couple weeks ago, I think, giving, as much update as we have at this point.
What is that?
My understanding is that approximately 15 of those people have been removed from the United States. My understanding also is that a handful are now awaiting some kind of criminal process, and some folks are waiting their immigration proceedings to move forward. I think, though, what truly makes that entire situation alarming is the fact that for days on end, nobody knew their names, nobody knew who their families were, how to inform their families. So there was a lot of confusion, and there were a lot of alarm bells that were kind of going off in the advocacy community, because this was very far from sort of what we have learned to expect in terms of deportations.
When you're talking about expeditious removal versus going into the courts, the Trump administration has fired a number of immigration judges in these first 100 days. I believe at least 8 in just the last week. Yeah. If the federal government's trying to speed up this often slow deportation process, why gum up the works of an already backlogged system in the immigration courts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That's also something that we weren't necessarily expecting from the second Trump administration, is to see sort of the beginnings of firing immigration judges. The immigration court system is already very significantly delayed, right. And so we're not sure if that then means that they are beginning to then put pressure on current judges to move through their docket so much faster, because now they're getting overwhelmed with more, with a heavier caseload. And so I think it's all just part of the attempt to make an already difficult process even more difficult.
Do you have an idea of what immigration courts are looking like in New Mexico specifically?
So New Mexico does not have its own immigration court. It kind of is divided in half, so that a lot of people living sort of in the top half of the state will feed into the Colorado immigration court. Most of New Mexico feeds into the El Paso immigration court. And the El Paso immigration court has been overwhelmed for as long as I've been an immigration attorney. And so we're already seeing, for example, even just asylum cases are being expedited and denied more quickly than we usually expect. People are not given their opportunity to present themselves in front of a judge, and instead their hearings are being canceled, and they're being asked to submit written pleadings. And so we're already noticing those changes.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the detention side of things. New Mexico is home to 3 ICE detention centers in Cibola, Otero, and Torrance counties. What are things looking like there?
Yeah, I mean, the conditions at the detention facilities have kind of always been really bad, right? What we are seeing since the second Trump administration began is certainly an overcrowding issue. But when you couple that with an understaffing issue, you end up with a very intense pressure on facility infrastructure, which is decrepit to begin with, right? So we're seeing issues, for example, at Torrance with sewage leakage that leads to sewage spillage inside the sleeping pods, and the men are forced to clean up that the mess themselves. We're seeing an inattention of attending to medical needs of the people being held there, including not providing medication for crucial conditions like HIV, diabetes, epilepsy. We're also seeing pretty significant issues with the delivery of important immigration documents to people being held in these detention facilities. Our asylum and detention team encountered a person who did not receive notice of their immigration court hearing until after the date had passed. So this is causing some pretty notable delays. Not only that, but we're seeing a very notable increase in issues with language access because there are more people who are being detained. There is a more broad variety of languages being spoken by the people being held at these detention facilities, to the point where our asylum team actually sent a letter to the Cibola County Detention Facility demanding that there be more language access opportunities. We're learning that people are having to rely on each other to sometimes to translate important legal documents, and when folks already have a limited English proficiency, it causes some pretty great concerns, for sure.
Significant barriers, no doubt. Let's talk about the border. President Trump transferred federal land to the Defense Department. They have established a New Mexico National Defense Area. Is that an appropriate use of the military, especially considering laws on the books that prevent the military from policing civilians?
Yeah, and I think that exactly speaks to sort of the greater issue here, right? I think that, first of all, military presence, not only along the border, but also in border communities, is not going to promote safety, right? It's going to stoke fear, and it feeds into this rhetoric that immigrants are a threat to this country. But to your point, and actually the ACLU of New Mexico published this really interesting article that will describe all of this way more eloquently than I could. But I think that the issue here is that the militarization of our borders and the essentially demanding military officers to arrest, detain immigrants, it causes an erosion of the very deeply held principle in the Constitution that the military is not to police civilians.
Are you aware, for viewers who aren't in border communities, aren't in southern New Mexico, what it feels like to be in these border communities in the southern part of the state?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly concerned that, even if we take the immigration piece out of it, right, we're concerned that this expansion of the national, I don't remember what they're called, national security areas or the military buffer zones, then opens the door for people who happen to be inadvertently driving or even walking in those areas to then face federal trespassing charges, right? And so this does not promote any sort of sense of security or safety among our border communities. It just, all it does is just send a clear message that immigrants are to be met with force by the military, which is very unfortunate.
Your organization, other immigrant rights groups and advocates, to an extent the state and local governments are working to support people who live in New Mexico who don't have legal status. For viewers who want to show up for this community, do you have any advice for how they can plug into this work?
Yeah, absolutely. There are obviously a lot of ways that folks can stay engaged in supporting the immigration community, even at a local level. Engaging in defensive, in defense participatory defense efforts is.
What is that?
Yeah, so essentially just being loud publicly in support of folks who are going through a criminal case, for example, in voicing your opinion, in pushing local legislators to pay attention to what's going on in specific cases in the courts. That is actually something that my colleague Sophia Genovese spoke to when she interviewed with y'all back in January. And so that's a really major way that folks can get involved. Obviously, by donating resources or time to legal aid organizations, or to nonprofit organizations is also very impactful, especially at a local level. And I think that we are very fortunate that the state of New Mexico has been firm in protecting the rights of immigrants in our state. That being said, the state legislature did not pass a lot of very important immigrant bills that would have also promoted public safety in the state. And so there's clearly a lot of work to be done in terms of urging our local representatives to take a stand and to prioritize the protection of our immigrant neighbors.
A lot of work to be done. Valeria, thanks so much for breaking that all down.
Thank you so much for having me.